Get started here. All right, so all right, so I believe we're good. We have everything up and running as it should be. Perfect, perfect. Okay, guys, thanks everybody for showing up. We're gonna go ahead and get started here tonight with the podcast slash stream that we do every Friday night from 10:30 to 11. So thanks everyone for joining via the stream at Twitch TV. Excuse me, the cough will never go away, at twitch.tv/sacred. That's SAICRED. Tonight, I'm going to have myself as well as Mr. Muldoon on the stream with me, so I'm excited about that. We get to show both faces tonight, so always fun to make sure that everybody out there gets to see who's talking and, see the facial animations.
And I'm very animated, for sure.
So anybody that's listening on Pantheon Radio, thank you for tuning in. Hopefully our voices will be sufficient for tonight for you all, but we always enjoy streaming and broadcasting live via Pantheon Radio. It's a great combination here. Really enjoying Pantheon Radio myself, listening to it on a daily basis. And again, I'm going to go ahead and start out with news tonight, guys. So if you haven't already and you would like to, make sure you sign up for the competition that we've got going on all March long. pantheonradio.com/compo. That's COMPO. And again, got an Echo Dot up there for grabs, as well as a mug and some other cool stuff. So go check that out, guys. It's just something fun for people to get involved in the community and kind of help out with Pantheon Radio as well. And it helps you make your mark, if you will, on Pantheon Radio, this new exciting thing that's going on. So if you want to get in early on the action here and really do something that's fun but also can be a little rewarding for you, check that out. But again, as always, I'll go ahead and mention one other thing, and that is the VOT show. Had a fantastic stream tonight with Zaid, excuse me, the guild leader from Faceless, and I gotta admit, I was very, very impressed. I've had some interactions with Zaid on the forums, and it seems like a very down-to-earth guy when he was sitting there talking to the VOT, and that was very impressive. I really enjoyed the conversation. I liked hearing what I heard, and I think they did a fantastic job, as always, with the question and answer. So if you haven't already, go check that out. A lot of good feedback from my perspective. I think that they went into some conversations or talked about some topics that were meaningful to me. So hopefully everybody else can get something out of that conversation as well. Again, it's always fun to watch those guys and help support them. So go check out the Voice of Terminus. You can always find them at Pantheon_VOT on Twitch. I believe they're streaming every Friday night. I think they're back on the regular schedule now, every Friday night at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So be sure to check those guys out. And then I've already mentioned my Twitch stream. I'll go ahead. I'm going to pass it over to Maul tonight because I want Maul to kick off the conversation. I got you on stream. I got the face showing up. Everybody can see the pearly whites. So go ahead and introduce your Twitch to everybody, and let's get into a conversation about what you want tonight.
Sure. Yeah, my stream, everybody, is MRPD Muldoon. I'm going to start streaming pretty regularly. A little shout out. I'm going to be starting this next Friday on the new EverQuest TLP, and I will probably just be streaming every single time I'm on and playing that, kind of having fun with that journey. If you want to join me with that, great. If you like EverQuest, it's a lot of fun. I enjoy doing that. Tonight, we're going to talk about, because I'm going to the TLP starting next Friday, I was kind of thinking about a subject that has been brought up on the forums, which is hot zones, and the idea that certain zones would give more experience than others. And this is actually seems like it's actually a pretty hot topic for some people, and for others, it's not a big deal. I have some pretty strong views on it, but only because I see it in the twilight of a game, EverQuest, and what that might look like in a game that I plan to spend a lot of time in. And Sacred and I are going to kind of trade ideas on that. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the things we've seen on the forums, and hopefully this is engaging for you guys. We're always open to talking about things that you want to talk about, so we always would like it if you can contact us and let us know. But for the most part, we're just going to talk about whatever we want, unless you guys have specific requests. So, Sacred, personally, have you I think the answer is no, but have you ever played EverQuest probably in the last like 6 or 8 years? And I'm not talking like Project 99, just live server, TLP or not.
Yeah, for 30 minutes maybe. So I don't know if that
So a
counts or
pretty
not.
limited experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to make sure there are no uncertain terms, and I'm sure so that you're on board with what hot zone means, I'm sure you know it because you're very aware of the forum posts. But a hot zone and EverQuest, there are two actually concepts that relate to experience in zones. Um, every zone has a zone experience modifier. So for the typical experience that's coded into the mob, the zone can have a modifier between I want I think realistically it could be between 1 and 200%. But I don't think I ever saw anything that was more extreme than maybe like 80 to 150%. Maybe there's more and I'm just misremembering. But then on top of that, there were ideas of hot zones that outside of the natural modifier, there were zones that kind of, I think they fluctuated about every month. Maybe it was almost quarterly or somewhere in between, and those zones would just be hiked up like crazy. Later iterations of the game where EverQuest started to actually focus on questing more instead of just grinding as much and putting in some daily type things, those hot zones had special dailies that you needed to do and things like that. So what we want to talk about is what that could look like in the realm of, oh, looks like we maybe lost some camera here.
Oh no, you're good. I was just making sure your sound's good on my end. So
Oh,
sorry.
okay. It has it not been?
No, no, it is. It is. I just want to double check as we're going here. So I turned the
Okay.
camera off for everybody listening on the radio. I just turned the camera off for a minute. So,
Okay, well, I'm sorry. I apologize for derailing, but we want to talk about what that might look like in the game because with Pantheon, I feel like the community has a really specific and particular way of what they would expect the game to be at launch and what they want it to be ever and always. And hot zones could technically and potentially have a really huge impact on it. Um, to kind of like for the sake of conversation, I'm not going to sit here and bullet point the pros and cons of it. Um, but kind of it kind of needs to be said that there are probably two big schools of thought, which is we want them in or we don't. And the reasons that people feel that way are usually pretty finite. The people who want them in, they like it because they see the potential for getting people to explore in new areas. So hot zones can be used as a vehicle to say, hey, there's a zone that we really don't see a lot of use. If we make it a hot zone and people actually want to go experience there and go form camps and grind, then they'll get to see this content we worked on. They'll have a new um, kind of vista point where, I mean, they'll get to see something that they're not just looking at the same stuff over and over for months. The people who don't want them in are kind of wishing that maybe the experience could be more static. This is probably a gross overgeneralization, but it feels like they're looking for something that's more static so that they could go anywhere and get the same experience. And it said as far as actual points for your character and then experience as a game, uh, where you don't feel like you have to be in a particular area because you're a min maxer. That you can go if you like water zones, you can go to that water zone with five other people and go have some fun, and you don't feel like you're wasting your time. So, as I said, I have strong feelings on this, and as I'm about to re-enter EverQuest, I'm probably going to, as we talk about this, draw on some of those experiences and what I'm expecting for Corne of the new server. But I kind of wanted to throw it back to you because A, I don't want to monopolize the time, and B, I don't think you and I have ever really talked about how you feel about
yeah, we haven't. We haven't. So let me make sure that I've got this correct in my mind, and hopefully this will help clear this up as well. Now, when you talk about a hot zone, do you talk about just a zone with more experience, or is that just more mobs in it? Is it generally better loot? Like, what really? I know you briefed on it, but is it something that can change? I mean, is it something the developers can just say, we would like to increase the experience or the mob respawn in this zone a little bit to hopefully attract more people to come here? Is that, am I thinking correctly on that?
Yeah, so I guess let me talk about what that has looked like in EverQuest. And somebody's probably going to correct me here, possibly in your Twitch stream. But as far as I know, the concept of hot zones that is being discussed on the forums has not existed in any other game. So I think it's highly relatable to talk about what a hot zone actually is. A hot zone says, we haven't changed any of the zone for you. We've just changed the incentive for you to be there. It doesn't mean more loot. It just means more experience per mob. So typically what it did is it was a multiplier on top of the already high or low zone experience modifier for the typical level of mob. Um, and it was a vehicle for devs to turn it on, turn it off. They could just go in, boop, boop, and make it so that the zone was a lot more experience per mob kill. And historically with EverQuest, it was used, I believe, somebody's going to correct me. Now that I'm remembering, it might have actually been every 6. And there were about 4 years that they were really on top of it and they really did hot zones. And then there was some confusion as to whether hot zones went away or if hot zones were set static on these zones that were the last bit that they selected. And then they just
Uh,
stayed like that forever. So there's actually people who want hot zones but were bitter with the experience that hot zones kind of stopped being relevant and it kind of made certain zones almost permanently more relevant or the concept just went away. I can't remember exactly what happened. But that's what it is. It's just more experience. It's a solely a vehicle to get you somewhere that they see as not a highly used area. It's also used to address that there were definitely some zones that had some high concentrated populations in it trying to compete for mobs and get into camps that were very scrunched. And the hot zone just says, hey, why don't you guys just go over here and share? This zone's still great, it's great because it's got a great modifier. We know why you guys want to go there, but why don't you go to Butcher Block Mountains? Why don't you go somewhere else? That's all it was.
So for me, I guess my first thought would be if I'm looking at a hot zone, I personally wouldn't like to see any loot changed. I definitely, that's like, I want to make sure that that's clear on my behalf. Like, I think if you start changing loot around based off of like waves, it gets weird for me, because then it's not just, okay, if I go to this zone, if I take the risk of traveling to this zone because it's deemed a hot zone at this point in time, then it's not just for the loot or not just for the experience, but it's for the loot as well. And I think that would make it forced upon you. You would almost have to do it then, because then again, if I'm like, okay, I'll put it this way. So if I think of like a hot zone, I think of it. I wouldn't want the experience modifier or the experience to be much higher. I would want it to be just slightly ever so noticeable, but I wouldn't want it to be like this huge gap. I mean, I wouldn't want to go there and it be like I don't know. I guess if I had to really do it, like a point, like a 50% increase or something like that, I wouldn't want to see it like doubled. I wouldn't want to see the experience doubled. That's just my personal opinion. I like the slow thought process, like the slow grind. I want leveling to be meaningful, so I wouldn't want to ruin that experience with a hot zone. So leveling and experience gain and things like that, I really wouldn't want to ruin that just because of a hot zone. But if I did have like a 50% or 20% or 30% increase on experience for this particular zone for this month or something like that, or for this amount of weeks, maybe excuse me, maybe for some people that's worth it because they're kind of in a location. If travel is meaningful, they're in a location to where that risk to get to that zone, let's say it's a low level zone, let's say it's like a level 15 zone, and let's say it's halfway across the world. Well, level 15, I may not have means to get there in a safe or reliable manner. I may risk more going to that zone, even though the experience is slightly increased in that zone. I may risk going there more than is what's worth getting there. Now, if that's just experience, then that's something that I can make up with through the leveling, through the levels. I can eventually catch up, or I can eventually equal that out, hopefully, as different zones change, as I move around and things like that. But if there's loot involved, that's also a factor in that. Then I think that really it shifts the weight of the risk versus reward, because now the reward's higher, and your risk to go there is, you're willing to take it more so than not. So I don't know. That's a tough subject for me. I think I've never truly experienced hot zones myself. So when I think of a hot zone, I think of it more like I think it. I always thought of it more like static zones. I always thought of it more like this particular, like, let's say that you had three dungeons. Let's say you have three continents. This is just hypothetical, of course. Let's say you have three continents and three dungeons, and they're all level 20 to 29 dungeons. Let's say, there's mobs in there that really help you level from 20 to 29. Now, in each one of those dungeons, there's variations of loot, and there's variations of experience. Now, for me, if I thought of like a quote unquote hot zone, I've always thought of it like maybe one of those three dungeons provided, it had better experience overall, because the drop, like the mob respawn rate was a little bit higher. They had a little more density in the mobs, more camps for people to be at. Like inside the actual dungeon itself, there was more camps, more spawns overall. So the experience gain was, of course, higher just because of that. Or even the mobs were easier to control. Like, I mean, if I'm in a dungeon, there's too dense, they're too close together, pulling aggro, pulling ads and things like that becomes a very risky experience, and they may lead to multiple deaths and things like that. So if I look at another zone that has just as many mobs, but they're more spread out, more dispersed, I may be able to control those mobs and pulls a lot more easily, so that I'm able to manage that risk better, and again gain more experience at a more rapid pace or something like that. So I've always thought of it kind of like that in my head. I've never thought of it where they're actually changing the experience modifier. So for me, if I'm thinking of it like in those three zone examples, I would think one of those continents would have slightly more preferred dungeon, whether it was the design or whether it was the experience that you gain per mob or whatever it was. But then I would like to see, like, when you hit 30, you have, let's say in the 30s, 35, from 35 to 45, there's another three zones in three different continents. And let's say that one continent that you were on before, that really was the better one for the better dungeon, now it's not. It's the least preferred of the three, and people are going to be more likely to travel to that other continent again, just to spread out the amount of people. But I think my concept of hot zones was way off. I was like, and I'm glad that you explained it to me
beforehand.
Yeah, I was way off beforehand. So when I was thinking about that before, like I am explaining it now, that concept was just completely off when it came to hot zones. So if I get back on the subject here of people actually manipulating the experience per mob to increase the amount of traffic that you get in that particular area, I don't know. That's a tricky one for me. There's pros and cons to it, of course. I think the real con for me would be if they increase the modifier or increase the experience to the point where leveling doesn't have that meaningful grind to it, that struggle that I really enjoy. And I think if they do something to limit that struggle, to take that away with the hot zones, then I just see that that's going to be, counterproductive to me, at least in the type of game that I would like to see. So I think as long as they don't do that, as long as they don't make it to that extent, I don't necessarily have a huge problem with it. But that's a hard, tricky line that you would have to teeter on.
It is, and I think that's why it is such a hot topic, is because I'm going to venture on what is potentially a wrong perception as to why zone experience modifiers, so putting hot zones aside for a second, why those were even done. I think those were done because some of the areas in the world and some of the dungeons had a higher risk, and they wanted a higher reward attached to that. Sometimes it's because there were just really hard names, or the camps were really hard to break, or something of that nature. And although it would be nice if all areas of the world were created equal, and therefore it was just up to personal taste where you wanted to go, and that everybody could find a place somewhere to do that. I highly doubt that's going to happen. I don't know a game that's like that at all, unless you start talking about like instance dungeons where the difference is pretty minuscule because they've gotten it down to such a science. But we're talking about open world areas, dungeons you can actively go to just set up camp and grind for hours. Because personally, I love to do that. Um, so when you have these zones that have a zone experience modifier, people start to flock to them. And the problem with that, and the problem that I'm probably going to see whenever I play on this TLP, it's happened on every TLP before Cornave, is that unrest. Um, what after unrest? Lower Guck, Solusex I, Sol B, Nagafin's Lair. Um, some of those places are so overcamped that there's many instances that were created for them. And even in all those instances, you could be trying to get into a particular camp and it's just camp. There's no space for you. And it doesn't feel great because you know that you could go somewhere else, but it's slower and it feels slower. It's not just 10% slower. It's usually very significant because of mob health, mob density, and they have a zone experience modifier. It's crazy. So I think hot zones were created because, well, we've created this problem where now everybody wants to be in 4 of the zones where there's like 400, and we need to get people to want to venture out and go to those places. So despite the zone experience modifier, we don't care how low risk or high risk a zone is. We want it to be an ideal place to go. So basically, I feel that hot zones exist only because there was a slippery slope. I mean, they just hit a point where they saw that places were you weren't going to them. And
Yeah.
so hot zones are nice. I think they're great. I think hot zones are fine. But they do the same thing because not every other zone out there is a hot zone at the same time. It creates the same problem where people are going to those hot zones or they're staying
Yeah.
at the other zones and they're not venturing out to other places. So I think that the concept of hot zones has like an underlying worry on the player base that for them to even exist, there's already a problem. And I think that I want to say that some people are probably looking at the matter of we don't hate hot zones. We want the developers to avoid the problem of even needing them in the first place because it would be it would be a dull situation if you have
Yeah.
only a couple of zones that people want to go to.
No, I absolutely agree with that. I think that's more where I lean as well. Just thinking it through, as you're talking about it, I absolutely agree. I mean, if we have meaningful content and experience and loot and adventure in every area of the game, meaning if I'm an elf and I'm, stuck in the low teens and I'm in kind of a rough spot, I would hope that the ogre at some point in time kind of feels that same pain, I guess you could say, because there's always going to be like in every game that I've played MMOs wise, there's always seemed to be like kind of a a lull in experience at some point. There's ups and downs. There's some levels where you hit certain pieces of it and it's awesome. I mean, it's oh, a second. It's it's a really great experience. But there's other pieces of it where it just you feel like you're just grinding and there's no, how do you say this? There's just no end to it. It feels like you're stuck. You can't get out of it. There's nothing that you can do to pass that level, and the next thing you know, you hit level. Let's say you're level 17, and it takes forever to get through level 17. All of a sudden, you hit level 18, and now you've got a whole nother mob type and area that just opened up to you because you've gained an additional spell or two, or additional ability or two, and now all of a sudden you're able to just fly through 18 and 19 and 20. But that 17 took you just as long to get from 16 or 17 to 18 as it did to get from 18 to 20. And I think that type of environment, that type of leveling experience gain, um, it makes things meaningful. And I'm just struggling on the concept of hot zones. I've never thought of it in that way where you actually change the experience modifier. And again, I'm just trying to really wrap my head around it because, like you said, if there's a problem in the first place, well, how do you eliminate that problem? How do you create the game in a way that that's not a problem? And I think the only way to do that is, like people are saying, is to kind of have that flat line across the terrain in a way that no matter what mob type I'm going up against, and no matter what area, there's some sort of familiar feel to it, whether it's HP value, difficulty of it, um, experience that you gain from it, something like that. And I don't know, that to me doesn't really provide, how do I say that without sounding unintelligent? That to me doesn't provide the same experience that I'm looking for either, because I would like to go to a different area, even if the mob types are the same level, and have to worry about, does this mob type have an excessive amount of HP? Does it hit for an extreme amount of damage? Does it have an ability that I'm not aware of that I cannot prepare for, or I haven't prepared for, and I've got to learn, you know, this mob versus another mob. So I don't know. That's a tough one for me. I'm trying to really put it into context. And I'll ask you this because you've experienced it. I mean, did those hot zones, did they actually solve that problem and get people to go to the areas they want them to go? But if they did, in fact, was it worthwhile? I mean, did it feel better when you were playing in that type of hot zone experience, or did it feel like you were just kind of forced to go in certain areas by the developers because of this? Like you were, it was basically they were guiding your hand. You weren't able to freely do what you wanted to do and still get the same experience. Were they guiding you through the experience themselves? And that's something that, I think that is something people fear as well.
Yeah, certainly. Actually, it's funny because it was such a problem and hot zones were created. Hot zones were actually a highly successful way to address that issue. It's like, well, darn, we've created this other problem by making the game more rewarding. So further that reward in other areas. I think that an opportunity for them would have been to change the hot zones more frequently, because the hot zones stayed stagnant pretty long, and maybe a little too long for people's liking. But it was nice to have that break. Um, I'll say that for me, I don't have a problem with staleness of content. I will do whatever it takes to be in the right camp at the right time to get the right item, whether it's financial gain, whether it's best experience. But the problem is, if there's no room for it, and you can't be there, then, well, darn, what am I going to do? These people who were able to wake up at the butt crack of dawn and get this camp get to have it for as long as they're there. So the hot zones were a really nice way to address that and create some space where it was really cramped. Um, so I don't want to say that there were any problems with hot zones. I just think that there were opportunities for them to be a little bit more dynamic and a little bit more interesting as far as like how many zones. Because hot zones kind of, it wasn't like, you have to think about it in tiers. There seemed to be a hot zone for every tier of level all the way to the top. So you didn't have a lot of options for a certain area. So if unrest is the number one place to look, and you're given the alternative to go to high pass hold, which by the way has a really high zone experience modifier. I know a lot of people know that, but there's like 8 mobs you can. It's so few mobs. It's really frustrating and annoying. So if if you don't have more options, then sometimes the hot zone didn't feel like a great option. So, long story short, but to kind of give you some idea of how successful hot zones were, the answer is yes, they were a good fix for that. Um, I think the conversation, and somebody had brought up in your Twitch chat that we don't think the devs knew how to fix the problem they had created with the zone experience modifier. Because what do you do? Do you say, well, whoops, we messed up. We're going to take that reward away and we're going to equalize every zone, because then people feel like something's been taken away. So
Yeah.
I think instead of creating an experience, a negative, you know, a punishment, basically, they had to throw something else in to try and remedy it.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it's like a stain on an issue that was just covered up with a rug, and the rug was really nice. It was nice to have. Um, I think that a lot of the conversation about hot zones is a fear that the game is just poorly designed from the developer standpoint. This early in Pantheon, the players are bringing it up because they want Pantheon developers to do good, do well,
Yeah.
to avoid that issue. If you
Yeah. So, okay. So again, I think that that's another good point too, though, if you're looking at it, when you talk about it early on, especially this phase, if you were to look at, if you were to start having the conversations of, do we want hot zones or not? And let's say that they did. Let's say that conversation came out and they were like, oh, we think we could make this work. We think we could do something with this. Well, then again, you start in that fear of, well, obviously it was created in the first place because there was an issue. Well, we're seeing it created, if that was the case, then we would be seeing it created before there was ever an issue that we knew about. So that would mean that they think there's already an issue there, or they think there's some way that they need to supplement for something else. But then again, if you look at it in the way of, like you said, where if later down the road they go, you know what, really, we don't have an issue. This is not an issue for Pantheon. Like we've actually created the game and made the zones to where people enjoy being in different areas at different times. Like the population's very spread out. It feels really nice. It's exactly what we wanted, and we never needed hot zones in the first place. Well, if you went back and tried to take that back at that point, well, now you, like you said, you feel like people are like, oh wow, I just got stripped of this. And even though most people would be like, I hate this, take it away, they would still complain that it's now not there after it got taken away, because that's just how people are. So, they would be like, hey, take this away. It doesn't need to be there. And then as soon as you took it away, why'd you take it away? I told you to take it away, but I didn't really mean for you to take it away. I just wanted to tell you to take it away. And then, you have that whole conversation, the whole, shebang about that. I guess where I'm looking at it as, wow, I just
get it together.
I know every time I start talking, I get so choked up with emotion. No, but I guess what I think of for now, especially, with conversations, not just on hot zones, but any conversation like this where we've seen it in the past where they've had to supplement or they've had to adjust to fix issues. And it's kind of been Band-Aids on, open wounds and from here and there. And I get it, when you're in the middle of it, then sometimes you have to do what's necessary to make it work for that time. And you always have the intention of going back and correcting it. It's just sometimes it never happens. It usually, it turns out it's like, it's not worth the investment, the time, the effort to fix this Band-Aid. We can continue to Band-Aid. We can continue to make this little supplement here, supplement there, and things will continue to churn through and no big deal. And if you go back and you rip that Band-Aid off and you really try to fix it, it usually causes some sort of bigger, issue potentially, or it can result in no fix at all. And now you've got to go back to, applying that Band-Aid. And as a developer, you kind of look like you don't know what you're doing in that point. So it's a scary place to be at. It's not a comfortable situation. So I always lean towards the thought of, if at first you don't have, if at first you don't know you need it, leave it out. And then later down the road, if something comes up where you find a way to implement that in a meaningful way, then that's when you look at it. That's when you look to do that. Because if you do it too soon, you have to commit that this is the way it's going to be permanently. And, unless you get to a major pass later down the road where it changes. Something changes. The mindset changes. The game changes. There's some big change that happens that
Well, like
allows
a
you to
big
do that.
expansion. Like if you
Yeah,
can fix your code before an expansion comes out, make that the part of the expansion. You know.
absolutely. You know, a major change within the expansion itself. So, I saw somebody mention something there, and you said it was a good idea. I didn't get a chance to read that. You want to go through that?
Yeah, absolutely. I hope you don't mind me telling your name. Strata TV here in Twitch was mentioning that hot zones under the guise of a major world event would be cool. They'd like to see it where maybe it's like a huge invasion, and the whole purpose of you being there, specifically now, is to thin the ranks. So I personally kind of imagine that as maybe there's not necessarily more mobs in some of the usual experience camp areas of the zone, but you could go to some of the more um, like iconic areas that suddenly have invasion troops, and you can set up an experience camp that is not really safe for you, but it's a place that you can grind the mobs, and maybe those mobs are just worth more experience or something. So that it's a part of a living world. There's kind of a story to tell behind it. It feels like there's something more than just, oh, the experience is better over here. Let's go over there for a couple of days. I like that idea, and I think that one of the the reason why I kind of echo that is one of the comments that he put at the very end is he would want that to last a few days instead of, um, only be for a couple hours. Like there's other games that have done
Yeah.
this kind of concept, like Rift, where there's an invasion and it lasts for maybe an hour and a half. He, it sounds like he would not like it if it happened frequently throughout the day. I was just sitting here thinking that one of my favorite concepts in Final Fantasy 11 was the lunar cycle, the daily cycle, weather, and how that impacted the world, how it impacted crafting, how it impacted success rate in crafting, what you could do, why you would do it. I kind of thought that maybe some zones should be like, what if there's a zone that's just full of werewolves? And during a full moon, those werewolves are out, they're harder mobs, and basically they're just harder to deal with. And it could be for several night cycles. So, like 4 in game nights or 5. So during the day, you wouldn't see those werewolves, but you would see them at night. So that would be kind
Yeah.
of an incentive and a fun little, oh my gosh, the zone's on fire with werewolves. Let's go grind there for a bit. And it wouldn't be constant all the time, but that would be kind of cool. I would like to see weird stuff like that, if they're going to do hot zones at all. And to be clear, I don't have a problem with them doing hot zones, especially if they want to highlight certain content. I just kind of mourn the idea of hot zones when it's there to try and fix a problem that they're having trouble fixing
Yeah.
otherwise. Because I would love to see all of Pantheon and be challenged to go to new places all the time instead of going to Lower Guck for the rest of all time.
Yes. Yeah, no, and I think it's actually funny you mentioned that. I was looking at that the other day. If I'm not mistaken, you know, there's been talks and there's been discussions and there's been mentions of, world events at times, and it's that's something like, you trigger an event, and I think Brad made a post about it, and I can't remember what the article name was now, but I know Brad made a post about it where he talks about the storm giants spawning and you having to go, engage that event, and that could be triggered off something that happened across the world, something that at first maybe we don't realize how to trigger that, but when I think of hot zones in that sense, like potentially events of that scale, I know that there have been conversations around those. And I know I'll have to go back and look at the word that Joppa used here, and I'll try to find that really quickly. But I know that there were also some mention like way back in 2015 even. So it's not like a new concept. This is something that they've been thinking about for a long time, where they've been looking at ways to incorporate, the world in events that happen occur in meaningful ways. And I'm hoping that, like you said, that it's not just one zone that's for a few hours, but maybe they can find a way to incorporate some of those kind of big events around the world into different zones so that, we do see a fluctuation of player base going to different zones for different reasons. I don't know if it's considered a hot zone, but just thinking of like a major event being triggered, and spawning in, let's say you have a lower level like the teens 20s type zone, and let's say you have a raid going on, and those raid those adventurers, they trigger some event that occurs, and that event that occurs can happen within a number of zones, but it happens to happen within that level 20 area that these people, again, we're going to have multiple levels in different in different zones. I get it, but I'm just saying, like, for typical players, there's a lot of level 20s in a particular zone. Well, let's say that triggers an event, and so those level 20s are over there farming their little orcs or something like that, and they're doing their thing, and they look over, and all of a sudden they see this huge massive event taking place right across from the right across the road there on top of a hill, or in a canyon, or in a at the mouth of a cave or something, where they see an entire raid now come out of nowhere that's just charging headstrong into this because it's an event that has been triggered or spawned or something. you know Even if you're not in that level range or trying to grind out, you might want to come there just to see it. I mean, I know as a young player in EverQuest, there was things that happened where I just wanted to be around to see it happen because I couldn't necessarily be involved in it based off my level, or the guild that I was in or something like that. Like, I wasn't necessarily involved in it, but just seeing it happen and unfold, you were there, you were a part of that. That was a major event. And I don't know. I think that if you looked at like major events, and you separate those from hot zones completely, I think the major event piece is definitely being considered and looked at from my understanding. I think the hot zone piece, like you said, if it's done in the right way, it might not be a bad thing, but that's a very slippery slope that I would definitely be hesitant as an individual to travel down, especially right out the gate. So I'm curious to see if anything comes from that, but I would lean more towards my first objective, my first thought would be, let's see if we can make some meaningful world events, something that's maybe triggered, or something that occurs based off of a certain time of day or night, something that encourages players to travel around the world, uh, you know, in a meaningful way, and encourages them to explore zones at certain times or certain peaks, or after certain things occur, so that we're continuing to see the population of the player base move around the world, even if they are max level, even if they are, those quote unquote, high tier players. They're still moving through lower zones and things like that, looking for, events that are going on, triggers, or just looking for something that may occur within a multitude of zones. There may be a spawn that's not just in one zone, but that a spawn that can, populate or respawn within a multitude of zones. And because of that, you see a flurry of different players at different times, traveling through these zones and continuing to explore them and looking for these, world bosses or mobs that are out there doing, just roaming the world.
Yeah, totes. And honestly, I mean, what we're describing already exists in other games, and
Yeah.
I think is a better way to keep the world alive and to keep the concept of going to those zones pretty constant. Where it has probably failed to some extent, and because maybe those concepts don't work so well in Pantheon, is, if I'm understanding correctly, Pantheon really is going to be one of those games where if you have 5 hours and you want to go grind somewhere, you technically could spend 5 hours in that zone. And what we're describing is almost kind of like more an invasion or a quick little activity that might last an hour and a half or two, and Rift did that super well. And because it did it so well, you were constantly going to those zones. But in the case of Pantheon, we're going to be, um, I think the overall player base is, I don't know, Pantheon could surprise us and it could change our concept of what it is to play, to gain experience, to be in the world as an adventurer. But I think a lot of people coming into Pantheon really are kind of expecting go sit somewhere and camp for a while and grind out, camp a mob type thing. So it's finding some concept between what we're all talking about, which is these fun little invasion things, and just a plain little experience bonus for a set amount of time in a zone. Um, and I really kind of hope that's the direction they're going. There's some echoing here. You said yourself here in the Twitch stream that seems to be the direction they're going. Um, I hope that the conversation that Hot Zones is generating right now is setting a fire under the dev team to find that happy medium and get something that makes it where I would want to just, hey, I don't want to grind here anymore. But I'm plenty incentivized to go grind somewhere else and have fun, and I don't feel like I'm missing out because I'm not at the ideal camp or something like that. So one one comment if I could, there was a
Yeah.
comment here that's saying hot zones are for dying games, not new MMOs. It's true. I Yes, but I think that it's funny because yes, that's true, but hot zones were also a popular implementation for a dying MMO that kind of made the game kind of fresh, and I could see why people want them. I think that's the whole conversation is like, well, why would you want them if you can't just create a game that at the base I want to go to those zones anyway without you incentivizing me? So I think that's why there's even a debate about it. It's like, can you? It's almost like a plea of, I mean, we don't really want hot zones. Can you guys just make a game that's really interesting for us to want to be anywhere all the time, always? I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's really where the debate is.
Yeah, no, and so I'm looking through a few different things here. So I was trying to find the post that Brad made. So again, I just want to be clear on this because I know that people are going to watch this and go, "Oh, Sacred and Maul are really pushing to have hot zones implemented in the Pantheon when it comes out." I just want to let people know flat out, I don't discredit any idea ever. And I know Maul is kind of the same way. We really try to flesh these out and see, is there a possibility of this working? How could it work if it did, come to pass? Things like that. I'm not saying that I am dead set and I want this. I'm not saying that I'm dead set and I don't. I'm saying that I think what the developers decide is best for the game. I'm fully on board with seeing how I can best utilize that and how that makes sense to me. I'm hoping to continue to see them, push the envelope when it comes to future, of MMOs or in general. But I think that I don't want to discredit any possibility or idea just because it's been implemented poorly in a past game or because it's been done slightly. Like, for example, they could implement something in just the very slightest of ways, the difference that makes it 100% better or worse. There's always a possibility that what they do and how they do it ends up changing, what you originally thought that was going to be into something it doesn't really matter as much anymore. It feels like it's supposed to be part of the game. So I don't want to discredit anything or throw anything to the side and just say, oh no, I don't like that concept. I never want to hear about it again. So we want to talk these through. We want to flesh these out and really give them, their chance. But with that said, I do know that not hot zones, but world events of such have been talked about plenty by the team. We've seen it or heard about it in VOT shows. Brad's talked about it in one of his posts on the forums when he does one of his, it seems like every few months he'll come out with a nice long post about, his thoughts and feelings towards certain, pieces of the game or certain aspects of the MMO genre in general and things like that. So he's made a post about it as well, talking again. That's where he talked about the Storm Giants and stuff. And then Joppa also mentioned a concept in a magazine article in 2016. So Joppa mentioned grand scale content. It didn't go into a lot of detail about it, but basically the gist that I got from that was, again, much like what Brad talked about with the Storm Giants or something, something triggering that triggers something of grand scale, something of magnitude, something of a major event on the server itself as a whole, something that's not just, small for one single raid, but something that is massive. And that's kind of the idea that I got from reading that. So that was a magazine post in 2016 that Joppa, did. And again, I think that those concepts, those ideas are up in the forefront of their mind and have been there for a while. And I'm looking forward to seeing how those come to pass later down the road, especially when we get, into the game. I'm just, I don't want to discredit any potential idea or possibility at this point. I want to continue to flesh that out. I'll end it on this and just say when it comes to hot zones, I agree with many. I personally would like to see something different than a hot zone come to pass that gives me a reason to go to a different zone, to explore it, to stay within it, to want to go there in the first place, to want to travel and see what see what I can find. And I think that we've heard a lot of different concepts in the game that are leaning towards that, as far as like you finding different abilities, maybe in a dungeon. A sage in the back of a dungeon drops a spell for a summoner or something like that, or a wizard that you might have to travel to a certain dungeon in a certain area to obtain that. Something like that draws me to go to that area, that go to that place to really explore and take the risk of travel and see what the world has to offer, even at lower levels potentially.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. That summarizes my points. I don't really have a lot more to say about it myself. Definitely of the opinion we'd like to see something other than hot zone. But it boils down to, I think the only reason anybody would be wanting a hot zone is because they want incentive. Players love to be incentivized. They love to have rewards. They love to have little extra things to come through, like experience weekends, all kinds of stuff. So I have a lot of confidence. I definitely didn't want to bring this up and talk about it because I worry that the Pantheon developers are not addressing that somehow in their development of the game. I actually have a lot of confidence that they're going to do a really great job with it. Um, I just think it's kind of an important idea because people do see hot zones as a sign of a game dying or being ineffective in some way. And from this conversation sparks tons of ideas. And I think that it sounds like they have some pretty creative people on the Pantheon team. So I'm not sure how many ideas that have come from the conversation are new and something they hadn't already considered.
Yeah.
Some of them are probably more detailed than fits in their current ideas and is not far fetched from something they would already implement. So I think that the whole debate kind of puts to rest the idea that I think it's good. I think if you took a poll right now, for some reason, I don't know why you would, people would probably resoundingly say no hot zones because there's just a negative connotation associated with them.
Yeah.
And it's looking into the why that I think will guide the Pantheon team into making zones more engaging as a whole so that people would want to be in different areas all the time.
Yeah, and Fantasy Freak, I mean, exactly, what we think as well. We think people that are looking at certain aspects like that, it's because they don't. Well, I'll put it to you this way. I think there's a lot of people that have only been able to play certain MMOs over the last few years, and to be honest with you, they haven't experienced some of even the MMOs we have now in the early states where there was a lot of great content, exploring was fun, and difficulty was increased. Like, over the last 10 years, really, MMOs as a whole have been just not where they need to be, in my opinion. And even the great ones of the past have slowly drifted into that as well. Less difficulty, able to solo, like all this stuff that we talked about before. But people just haven't had a chance to experience some of that old school MMO feel and flavor. And I think that, like you said, players want something like this because they just don't know any different in some cases. They've never experienced something different, and when I say that, they've never experienced wanting to travel to a zone, to a dungeon, to a different area because they just simply wanted to. They've always experienced somebody encouraging them to go there for some particular reason, whether it was an experience gain or there was basically nobody else in any other zone besides this one, so you might as well just go to this one, or there's some sort of event that happens in this zone where you can gain fast experience and it really doesn't happen in other zones, so there's no reason to go to other zones, just go to this one. Yeah, again, um, it seems like a lot of times what ends up happening is you're almost guided through an MMO like you would be just a regular RPG. You're put on a path, you're kind of directed to go this way, look at this, look at this, look at this, see this. And it doesn't really feel like you're just out there exploring and traveling and going, well, what's down that cave? What's around that corner? What's there? Because a lot of these, current state MMOs, they'll basically just tell you, don't worry about the cave. There's nothing in it that's important, and you'll listen because you trust in what they've got, the path they've planned out for you more or less of how to get the quickest experience, how to get the best gear, all this stuff. So I think a lot of it has to do with just players haven't experienced it. And the players that have, I think that they truly understand. And like you said, Maul, that if we took a vote, I think the vote would be pretty, outstanding towards the negative aspect of, we don't want that. And I think that's because a lot of the players that we have now currently in the Pantheon community have experienced that at one point in time. So okay, guys. I know we're coming close on time here. As far as like final thoughts go, I think we've given final thoughts on this. I don't want to beat this horse too much.
Yeah.
But I will say I am excited to see meaningful content put around the world. I'm excited to see zones that provide us with different level variations, not just, a level 10 through 19 zone, and that's the only mob type you're going to see and the only players you're going to see in it. I'm excited to see where there's level 10s that are, just 20, 40 feet away from a group of level 50s that are, adventuring as well. I'm excited to see that we're bringing some of that old school, feel and flavor back where, there's going to be certain aspects of the game that really draw us into travel and exploration and not just being guided along a path, through the game itself. So there's a lot that we're going to continue to talk about on these podcasts and these streams. I'm always open for ideas. I know some of these ideas, guys, bear with us. Some of these ideas, they're rough. We're going to have to talk through it. We're going to have to flesh it out and really see what we come to at the end of the stream. Other ideas, it's going to be more straightforward, more solid, and we might get a few ideas in that night. And then we might have some where we just, we walk away from this and we say we agree to disagree, between me and Maul and myself. So we're going to continue to have these conversations and be open about it. We give our opinions, give our thoughts and feelings, and we look for the community to help us, provide some of those questions, some of those, I guess you could say conversations as well. What would you like us to talk about? What would you like us to dive into, give opinions on? Let us know because we would be more than happy to discuss those and hopefully be able to kind of air some of that out, just along the radio broadcast here or the stream itself. And then again, these always go on YouTube afterwards. So hopefully somebody else maybe down the road that didn't quite think about that topic that you want to bring up, maybe they get something out of it as well. So always happy to have people provide input for us and give us some conversation topics to talk about. I think it's a great thing that, the community can do for us, but it's just something that I think is fun right now that we're having a blast with, is giving our opinions on it as well. So as always, guys, Maul, you want to go ahead and make sure everybody gets you a follow on Twitch so they can check you out when you're off stream or off podcast as well?
Yeah, sure. A little plug. Again, it's twitch.tv/MRPD Muldoon. I had a lot of fun, guys, tonight. Thanks so much. Again, just let us know if you have something you want us to talk about, and we'll rip it to shreds. Thanks.
All right, guys, and as always, Sacred here signing off for the podcast. You can always find me at sacred.tv I need to put it on like a sticky note above here. I never get it right. It's twitch.tv/sacred, SAICRED. Find me somewhere online, on the forums, on Twitter, wherever, and let me know what you want us to talk about next, guys. But for now, that's it. Thanks everyone for tuning in on the radio. Thanks everyone for tuning in the stream. We're going to cut out here for a minute and come back on the stream, and then we'll go from there. Thanks, guys.
See ya.